He stood there full of pride at his son's graduation until three guards told him to leave. Just when it seemed like all was lost, six Navy personnel walked in, and everything changed in an instant. It was a day of celebration, the day his son would graduate. His chest swelled with pride, eyes scanning the sea of faces, all gathered to witness a momentous occasion. For this black Marine, standing tall in his crisp uniform, this day meant everything. His son had worked hard, overcome obstacles, and now finally, it was time to bask in the glory of his achievements. But then came the moment that would change everything. Three guards, all wearing the same smug expressions, approached him with authority. Without so much as a word of greeting, they pointed towards the door. The message was clear. You need to leave. For a split second, his mind refused to process it. He thought it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it was a mistake. But no, they insisted. Sir, you're not allowed to be here. It didn't make sense. He was a Marine, proudly serving his country, a father here to celebrate his son's future. What could possibly be wrong? Wasn't he entitled to this moment just like anyone else? He had sacrificed years, blood and sweat for this country, for freedom. Yet standing here in his uniform, he felt the sting of something far worse than rejection. It was a quiet form of humiliation. As he looked around, he saw the crowd obliviously chatting and laughing, completely unaware of the storm brewing just outside. His mind raced. He couldn't understand what was happening. Was this how far things had fallen? Had the pride of serving his country somehow become a burden? Why was he being treated like a criminal for simply attending his son's graduation? The conversation escalated. The guard's words grew colder, more demanding. Sir, you need to leave now, or we'll have to escort you out. The frustration bubbled up inside him. His heart pounded in his chest. How had things come to this? Why was the color of his skin, his uniform, his very identity the reason for this disgrace? He didn't want to cause a scene, but there was no denying the truth. This was no longer about leaving the event. It was about something far more important. His pride, his dignity, and his son's future were on the line. Every nerve in his body screamed that he needed to stand his ground. And yet, in the pit of his stomach, he knew the reality. He was at a disadvantage. These guards were in control of the situation. They had the power. The moment stretched on, each second like an eternity. But the Marine, despite the rising anger, stayed composed, his face an unwavering mask. He wasn't about to let them win this. One of the guards leaned in, his breath cold. Do you understand what we're saying? But before the Marine could speak, before he could gather his thoughts, something shifted. His training kicked in. He was no longer just a father. He was a soldier. And soldiers don't back down in the face of injustice. Not when it's in front of their children. Not when it's in front of the people who need to see that standing up for yourself is the only thing worth doing. Just as the situation seemed to hit its peak, a powerful sound cut through the tension. The heavy footsteps of 6 SEALs, unmistakable, coming to the Marine side. The guards turned, caught off guard. The Marine didn't have to say a word. His brothers in arms had arrived. The entire room grew silent. With one movement, one unspoken command, the guards knew. They were out of their depth. The tension in the air was so thick, it felt as though it might snap at any moment. The Marine stood firm, his jaw clenched in silent defiance. His heart raced, but his expression remained calm, controlled. The SEALs behind him, a silent army of brothers, stood like stone statues, their presence alone shifting the atmosphere from oppressive to powerful. The guards, visibly shaken, hesitated. One of them looked nervously over his shoulder, as if searching for some authority to fall back on. But there was none. The silence stretched on, unnerving, broken only by the faint murmur of voices from inside the hall, oblivious to what was unfolding outside. The Marine locked eyes with the lead guard, who took a hesitant step forward. He tried to regain some semblance of control. Sir, we can't allow... But the Marine cut him off. His voice, calm yet full of authority, sliced through the tension. You don't know who I am, do you? The words weren't a question. They were a statement, and they held a weight that no one could ignore. The guards exchanged uneasy glances, trying to hide the cracks in their confidence. One of them shifted uneasily, the trembling in his hands barely noticeable, but enough for the Marine to catch. He knew these men weren't prepared for this, for the force of his resolve, for the sheer power of his presence. "You see," the Marine continued, his voice gaining strength, "I've bled for this country. I've fought for people who didn't even care about the freedom they took for granted. But that's the job, right? We do the dirty work, and we keep the peace. We fight for the people, for the ones who need us, and for moments like this." He paused, his gaze sharpening. "But not this time. Not today." The lead guard's mouth opened, but no words came out. His power had been stripped away, not by physical force, but by the power of truth. The Marine wasn't just standing up for himself anymore. He was standing up for every person who had ever been unjustly treated, every person who had been silenced. The silence that followed felt like a standoff. The guards had nothing left in their arsenal. Their authority, their confidence, had crumbled. The only thing they had left was the weight of the Marine's words. Then, in a move so swift, so calculated, it felt like the air itself shifted. The Marine's brothers, 6 SEALs, took a step forward, their boots hitting the ground with an unmistakable force. The guards stepped back instinctively, as if the mere presence of these elite warriors was enough to swallow up the small bubble of power they had left. The guards exchanged glances, unsure how to proceed. They weren't just outmatched physically, they were outclassed. The SEALs weren't just warriors, they were symbols of something greater: unity, strength, and justice. One of the guards, a younger man, spoke up, his voice shaky. "We were just following orders." The Marine didn't even flinch. "I don't care about your orders. I care about what's right. And right now, what's right is me being here for my son." The words landed with a finality that left no room for argument. The guards, with nowhere to go, backed down. A single glance from the Marine was all it took. The SEALs stepped back in unison, silently signaling that the moment was over. The power had shifted. The battle, though brief, had been won. The crowd inside the graduation hall remained unaware of the drama outside. But for those who had witnessed it, nothing would ever be the same. The Marine had stood tall, unwavering, and in doing so, he had reminded everyone that the greatest battles are not always fought with fists. They're fought with dignity, with truth, and with the courage to stand up when no one else will. The silence that followed the Marine's words was deafening. For a brief, fleeting moment, it felt as though time itself had come to a halt. The tension was palpable, like a thin wire stretched to its breaking point, ready to snap. The guards, their confidence shattered, stood frozen. The Marine, his face still calm and resolute, waited. His eyes, however, betrayed something deeper: anger, hurt, and a quiet sadness. He wasn't angry just because of what had happened. He was angry because he had seen this before, too many times, in too many places. The subtle prejudices, the quiet discriminations that could break a man down piece by piece until he had nothing left but the memory of his dignity. But today he wasn't going to allow that. Not today. Just as the tension was about to explode, the heavy sound of boots hitting the concrete broke the silence. The Marine didn't have to look back to know who it was. The 6 men walking towards him, their movements synchronized with military precision, were his brothers, SEALs. The best of the best, and they weren't here to stand idly by. Their arrival was like a sudden storm that swept away the tension in an instant. The guards, who had been trying so hard to hold on to their authority, faltered under the weight of the SEALs' presence. Each one of them, clad in their distinct gear, moved with purpose, their eyes locked on the guards with an intensity that spoke volumes. The lead guard swallowed hard, his body stiffening with the realization that he was no longer in control. He glanced at the other guards, but no one said a word. The power had shifted from their hands to the SEALs, and they knew it. It wasn't just the military prowess that these men represented. It was the unspoken strength of loyalty, camaraderie, and brotherhood that made their presence so formidable. The Marine's chest swelled with pride, not just for himself, but for the men who had come to his side when it mattered most. These were the brothers he had bled with, fought with, and who had never once wavered in their loyalty. They were his family, his true family, and in that moment, he realized something important. He wasn't alone. He would never be alone again. The SEALs didn't need to say a word. Their mere presence was enough to make the guards retreat. They stood side by side, flanking the Marine like an impenetrable wall. The lead guard, his face pale and unsure, took a tentative step back. "What do we do now?" one of the guards asked, his voice barely a whisper, as if unsure whether speaking would provoke the wrath of the SEALs. "Step aside," came the curt reply from one of the SEALs, his voice low but authoritative. The guards hesitated. They were faced with an impossible decision: back down and risk losing face, or escalate the situation and face the consequences of angering the SEALs. They took the only path that made sense. Without another word, they stepped aside. The Marine didn't rush forward. He didn't need to. The room behind those guarded doors was still filled with oblivious guests. His son's graduation was waiting for him, but more than that, the lesson of standing up, no matter the cost, was more important. His son inside that room had worked tirelessly for this moment, and he too would learn a lesson today, one that wasn't taught in textbooks or lectures. He would learn what it meant to fight for what's right, to stand tall against injustice, and to never let anyone strip away your dignity. The Marine took a deep breath. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing against his chest, but there was no fear, only resolve. He turned toward the SEALs, giving them a silent nod. The SEALs moved to follow, stepping in behind him as he approached the door. But just before he reached for the handle, he paused. His thoughts flickered back to the years of service, the battles fought, the scars worn on his body and soul. He thought about the struggles he had faced, the times when he had been pushed to the edge. But more than anything, he thought about his son, the reason he was here today. He could feel his son's eyes on him, even if his boy didn't know what had just transpired. He could imagine the pride in his son's eyes when he saw his father walk through that door. Not as a Marine, not as a man of war, but as a man who had fought for his right to be there, to be a father, to be a witness to his son's triumph. With one final glance toward the guards, who had now stepped back into the shadows, the Marine pushed open the door. His son, standing near the front, froze as he saw his father enter. For a moment, everything stopped. The Marine could see the confusion on his son's face, then the realization, followed by a flash of pride. The Marine smiled, the tension in his chest melting away. This moment, this small victory, was worth every struggle, every hardship he had faced. His son was the future, and today, his son would see exactly what it meant to stand up for what's right. The guards? They had already been forgotten. The graduation ceremony was in full swing. Laughter and applause echoed through the hall. But inside the Marine's mind, the world was silent. The world outside had faded away. All that mattered now was the moment before him, standing there in the back of the room. His son, his pride and joy, was walking across the stage, his smile wide, his head held high. The Marine couldn't help but swell with pride. He had fought for this. Every sacrifice he made, every moment of hardship was worth this one moment in time. But even as the applause rang out for his son, the tension from earlier, the chaos outside, still clung to him like a shadow. As his son shook hands with the principal and received his diploma, the Marine could feel his heart racing. His son didn't know what had happened outside. He was just a boy, eager to move on to the next chapter of his life. He hadn't witnessed the humiliation his father had endured just moments ago. The Marine clenched his fists at his side. It wasn't about the guards anymore. It was about something bigger. This moment was supposed to be about celebration, about family, about his son's success. And yet, in the midst of that celebration, something lingered in the air. The SEALs, who had remained standing silently by his side, noticed the change in his demeanor. Their eyes were alert, scanning the room, aware of every movement, every whisper. They knew something was coming. It was only a matter of time. The Marine turned to them. He didn't need to say anything. The SEALs, loyal and perceptive, understood without a word. They were ready for whatever came next. But before he could focus on the ceremony, his attention was abruptly pulled to the front of the room. His eyes locked with the eyes of one of the guards, who had just entered the hall. The same guard who had tried to force him out. The same man who had insulted him without ever knowing who he truly was. The guard's eyes narrowed as they met the Marine's gaze. His face was flushed with anger, and his hands trembled slightly. The Marine knew what was happening. He wasn't done yet. He still had something to prove, something to settle. The guard's pride had been hurt, and now he was looking for a fight. The Marine felt the tension in the air shift. The guard took a few steps toward him, his footsteps heavy, determined. The crowd seemed to sense the change as well. Whispers started to spread like wildfire. The Marine stood tall, unwavering. His posture was one of calm authority, but his eyes burned with the heat of an unsaid challenge. Without warning, the guard spoke, his voice loud enough to cut through the noise of the ceremony. "You don't belong here. You should have left when we told you to. You're just a Marine, nothing more. And you don't deserve to be in this room." The words stung, not because they were true, but because they reflected the hatred and ignorance that had tried to drag him down. The Marine's pulse quickened, but his face remained calm. He refused to let this man, or anyone, see him falter. The SEALs around him shifted, their bodies tense, ready to spring into action if needed. But the Marine, ever the tactician, held them back with a simple gesture. He wasn't going to let the guard bait him into a physical confrontation. Not here, not now, not in front of his son. The Marine took a step forward, closing the distance between them. His voice was steady, unwavering. "I earned my place here. I earned the right to stand in this room. And you," he pointed slowly, deliberately, "you're nothing but a coward who hides behind a uniform, too afraid to face the truth." The guard flinched, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. He took another step forward, trying to stare down the Marine. The tension in the room reached a boiling point. The people in the hall were now silent, watching in suspense. Every person in that room could feel the weight of what was happening. For a moment, it seemed like the world held its breath. But then unexpectedly, the guard hesitated. His eyes flicked to the SEALs standing like stone behind the Marine, the subtle power of their presence unmistakable. He swallowed, a flicker of doubt creeping into his expression. But instead of retreating, he tried to muster his strength. "I don't care what you've done," the guard spat. "You're just a soldier. You're nothing compared to what we represent." That's when the Marine's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "What you represent," he said, his tone cold and firm, "is a system built on fear and lies. You don't represent anything but your own ignorance." The guard stood there for a moment, glaring at the Marine, before he slowly, grudgingly turned away. The confrontation, though heated, had come to an end. The Marine had won, not with force, but with the sheer strength of his resolve, his dignity intact. And in that moment, the room seemed to exhale. The tension that had threatened to escalate, that had threatened to destroy the peace of this special day, dissolved. The Marine had done what he had come to do, not just for himself, but for his son, for the future. As the guards retreated, the Marine returned his attention to his son, who was now standing at the front of the room, smiling broadly, his diploma in hand. The Marine's chest swelled with pride again, this time even more strongly than before. His son had seen what it meant to stand up for what's right, to never back down, and to fight, not with fists, but with honor. The Marine's son walked toward him, the crowd parting as he did. He took his father's hand, his grip firm and warm. The two of them stood together, father and son, as a symbol of strength, of resilience, and of the unbreakable bond they shared. The crowd erupted into applause, but for the Marine and his son, it was more than just a celebration of academic achievement. It was a celebration of something far deeper, of dignity, of respect, and of the lessons that would last a lifetime. The applause from the crowd felt distant, like a muffled echo in the back of the Marine's mind. As his son stepped forward, shaking hands with professors and friends, the Marine stood there, still processing everything that had happened. His son was smiling, unaware of the battle outside, unaware of the forces that had tried to tear his father down for simply being there. But now more than ever, the Marine understood the weight of his mission. This moment wasn't just about fighting for his right to be present. It wasn't even about proving something to the guards or the SEALs who had his back. This was about his son, about ensuring that he would never be subjected to the same injustices his father had endured. It was about teaching him that no matter how strong the opposition, no matter how deep the prejudice, standing tall in the face of adversity was the only choice. His son walked towards him, his eyes full of joy, completely unaware of the silent war that had just played out. The Marine's chest tightened as their eyes met. He could see the pride in his son's expression, the excitement of completing a long journey. But there was something more, a quiet respect, a growing understanding. In his son's eyes, the Marine saw more than a child. He saw a young man learning to carry the weight of his own future, standing on the precipice of a life where the world was his to shape. And now, more than ever, the Marine knew that he had to protect that future. As his son reached him, he held out his arms, and the two embraced. The crowd cheered, but the Marine was lost in the moment. He wasn't thinking about the world outside or the painful confrontation that had just transpired. He was thinking about how his son's future was unfolding right in front of him. "I'm proud of you," the Marine whispered in his son's ear. His son pulled back slightly, looking up at him, his face a mix of joy and confusion. "What happened outside, Dad? I saw the SEALs and the guards. Are you okay?" The Marine smiled, his eyes glistening slightly. "I'm fine. More than fine." He paused for a moment, feeling the weight of the day settle in. "I did what I had to do, and I'd do it again. For you. For us." His son looked at him, still processing, but understanding enough to know that there had been something important, something powerful behind the Marine's words. The Marine could see it in his eyes, the recognition that there was more to this day than just the ceremony, more to this life than just going through the motions. "You stood up for us, didn't you?" his son asked softly, almost as if the realization had just dawned on him. The Marine's hand rested gently on his son's shoulder. "Yes, I did. And now you need to stand up for yourself, for what's right no matter what. That's how we fight. That's how we win." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The Marine had lived his life fighting for others, his country, his fellow soldiers, and now his son. But this lesson, this moment, would stay with his son forever. The realization that sometimes the greatest battles weren't fought with weapons or fists, but with dignity, courage, and the willingness to stand against the tide. The Marine's son, now standing tall beside him, looked out at the crowd, at the family and friends who had gathered to celebrate. He didn't know the full story. He didn't know everything his father had endured just to be there, but he didn't need to. What mattered was that he was there, and his father was there, together. In that moment, that was enough. The ceremony continued, and the Marine could feel the weight of the day lifting. His son's future was unfolding before him, and he was part of it. The anger and frustration that had burned inside him just hours earlier had been replaced by a quiet peace. He had stood up for what mattered most, and now he could step back and allow his son to take the reins. The Marine knew that this moment, this day, would shape the man his son was becoming, and as the ceremony drew to a close, he felt an overwhelming sense of pride, not just for the achievements his son had made, but for the lessons he would carry forward. Lessons of strength, resilience, and standing tall in the face of adversity. Lessons that no one could ever take from him. As the ceremony ended and the graduates made their way out of the hall, the Marine stood tall. He felt the eyes of the crowd on him, but this time it didn't matter. He had already proven what needed to be proven. He had shown the world, and most importantly his son, that standing up for what was right was always the right choice, and for that he could hold his head high. The day after the graduation was a blur. The celebrations were over, but the ripple effects of what had happened lingered in the air. It was almost as if the world had shifted slightly, as if something that was always buried beneath the surface had finally come to light. The Marine found himself thinking back to that moment in the hall, when the tension had been so thick you could cut it with a knife, and the guards had stood there frozen in the face of his resolve. But it wasn't just the confrontation that had stayed with him. It was the lesson his son had learned. That night, as the Marine lay in bed, he could hear his son moving around the house, talking with friends on the phone, laughing, the same way he always did after a big day. But tonight, there was something different about it. The conversation seemed quieter, more thoughtful, as if his son was processing the events in his own way. The Marine couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the events over and over in his mind, his thoughts spinning in circles. He thought about the guard who had tried to humiliate him, the SEALs who had come to his side, and the moment when his son had stood with him, proud and unafraid. But it was the quiet, still moments that spoke the loudest, the ones that happened when the world was silent, the ones where, without words, the Marine knew he had shown his son what it meant to be a man, to stand up, to never back down, and to always protect those who mattered most. But then, the phone rang. The Marine's heart sank. He didn't know why, but something told him this call was different. His instincts, honed over years of service, kicked in. He grabbed the phone, his hand steady despite the knot forming in his stomach. "Hello?" he said, his voice low, expectant. "Is this the Marine from yesterday?" The voice on the other end was thick with authority, but there was an underlying edge of unease to it. "Yes," the Marine replied, his mind racing, his senses heightened. "What do you want?" There was a brief pause before the voice came back, louder now, almost accusatory. "We need to talk about what happened at the graduation yesterday. The situation involving the guards, the SEALs. It's already making waves." The Marine's jaw clenched. He could feel the weight of this conversation pressing down on him, the burden of being the target of someone's anger, or worse, their vendetta. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, his voice firm. The voice on the other end softened slightly, but there was a note of threat. "It's being reviewed. There are questions about how this was handled. We've had multiple complaints about the behavior of the guards, about the SEALs intervening. We need a statement from you, or this will escalate." The Marine closed his eyes, a wave of exhaustion sweeping over him. This wasn't over. He had known it wouldn't be. He had known there would be fallout, but he hadn't expected it to come so quickly, so sharply. But in that moment, the Marine realized something. This wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't even about the guards or the SEALs. It was about something much larger, about what he had shown his son, about the values he had instilled in him, the lessons he had taught him in the face of adversity. Those lessons had to be protected at all costs. He wasn't going to let them take that away from his son. He wasn't going to let them twist this into something it wasn't. "I'll be there," the Marine said, his voice steady, his resolve hardening. "But I'll be speaking the truth. Nothing more, nothing less." The line went dead, but the weight of the words still hung in the air. The Marine sat back, his thoughts racing. He could feel his son in the next room, unaware of the storm that was about to break. But the Marine knew what had to be done. He had to protect his son, his legacy, and the lesson he had given him. That lesson had to stand, unshaken. The next day, the Marine found himself standing before a group of officials, their faces hard and unreadable. The room was sterile, cold, and the weight of the moment hung over him like a storm cloud. He could feel the eyes on him, sizing him up, waiting for him to crack, for him to show weakness. But he wasn't going to let that happen. He stood tall, his uniform sharp, his posture unwavering. And when they asked him to explain what had happened, he did so with a calm, measured tone, speaking only the truth. "Yes," he said, "I stood up for what was right. I stood up for my son, for my dignity, and for the values that matter. I don't regret a single moment of it." The room went silent. And then, as if on cue, one of the officials, the one who had been the most vocal, the one who had seemed most ready to judge, leaned back in his chair. He studied the Marine for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're not like the others," he said almost to himself. "You're different." The Marine didn't respond. He didn't need to. The truth had been spoken. He had done what he had to do, and now it was time to let it go. He left the room with his head held high. No more questions, no more debates, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that what he had done was right. When he returned home, his son was waiting for him. This time, there was no need for words. His son stood tall, a reflection of everything the Marine had worked for. They didn't need to speak. The bond between them was stronger than any words could ever express. As father and son stood together, side by side, the Marine realized that this was what mattered most. He had fought for this, and no one could ever take it away. The days that followed felt different, quiet, but filled with weight. The Marine woke up each morning with a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that he had stood firm when it mattered most. But it wasn't just about the victory over the guards, or even the statement he had made to the officials. No, it was about something deeper. It was about the lesson, the story that he had woven into his son's life. His son, the boy who had been at the center of it all, the one who had witnessed the drama, who had felt the tension, and who had learned more about the world that day than any classroom could ever teach. The Marine had done everything to protect his son, not just physically but emotionally, mentally. He had given him something that no one could take away, a deep understanding of what it meant to stand up for what was right, to be strong, not through force, but through character, to lead by example. That morning, as they sat at the breakfast table, his son looked at him with an expression that was different, more thoughtful, more mature. "Dad, I've been thinking a lot about what happened," his son began, his voice quieter than usual. "I know it wasn't just about me, but I want you to know something. What you did, it was, it was more than just standing up to the guards. You showed me how to be strong, even when things aren't fair." The Marine's heart swelled. He had expected his son to have questions. Hard questions, maybe. But this was something deeper. It was an understanding, a realization that his son was beginning to see the world through a new lens, a lens of respect, integrity, and honor. "You don't have to be afraid to stand up, son. Not ever," the Marine said, his voice thick with emotion. "Life isn't always fair, and it won't always give you what you deserve. But you stand up no matter what. You fight for the right thing, even if it means standing alone." His son nodded, a deep sense of gratitude in his eyes. "I get it now, Dad. You're not just a Marine. You're a man who stands for something. I want to be like you. I want to fight for what's right, no matter how hard it gets." The Marine sat back, taking a deep breath. This moment, this exchange, was everything he had ever wanted. It wasn't about accolades or medals. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about passing on the legacy of honor, courage, and resilience to the one person who mattered most. His son. The Marine smiled softly. "And you will, son. I'm proud of you. More than you'll ever know." But as the days passed, the Marine realized that the true lesson had only just begun. The world had tried to tear him down, tried to make him feel less than he was. But in the end, the victory wasn't in the confrontation with the guards or the officials. The victory was in the quiet moments, when his son looked up to him, saw him for who he truly was, and understood what it meant to fight for what mattered. And that was the greatest lesson of all. A week later, as they stood side by side at the family dinner table, the Marine realized something profound. The world had tried to break him, to force him to bow to a system that valued power over principle. But in the end, it had only made him stronger. It had made his family stronger. His son, now with a new sense of purpose, had found his own voice in the wake of the Marine's actions. He wasn't just a boy anymore. He was becoming a man, shaped by the lessons of resilience and honor that had been passed down to him. The Marine knew that his son's future would be filled with challenges, challenges that would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. But he also knew that his son would face them with the same strength, courage, and dignity that he had shown that day. Because in the end, that was what truly mattered. Standing tall, standing proud, no matter what. The Marine leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to his son. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would always be obstacles, always someone who would try to tear them down. But now more than ever, he was confident in the knowledge that his son was ready. Together they had faced the storm. Together they had learned that the most important thing in life wasn't winning or losing. It was standing for what was right, no matter the cost. That was the true victory. And with that, the Marine felt a deep sense of peace. For this was the legacy he would leave behind, one of courage, honor, and the unwavering belief that standing tall in the face of adversity is the greatest victory of all.